Well, thank you also for having me. It's an honor to be here. Roger mentioned that I'm a fellow at the Center for New American Security. In addition to that, I run a little company called Keras Associates, and we spend a lot of time working in fragile states around the world. We work on a lot of alternative energy, peace building, community-based development work. So what I want to do in the next 15 minutes or so is share with you some tentative observations from our current work on the issue of state versus non-state interventions in fragile states. And I am fairly liberally interpreting the panel topic of new thinking about non-state armed groups. When the international community intervenes in complex emergencies in fragile states, the response tends to have four key characteristics that you see repeated again and again, whether you're talking about nation states intervening or talking about international organizations intervening. Firstly, it tends to be state-based. It tends to focus on government. It tends to be top-down. It focuses on the central government. It tends to be very focused on institutions, creating effective or at least just existing institutions of some kind of central government structure. And it tends to be security-oriented, which tends to make it exclusive. We tend to go into an environment with the agenda of building institutions of a central state which the international community can recognize, and people that have a different agenda tend to be classified as enemy. They tend to be excluded from the process. And so we often find ourselves engaging in conflict. But what we found in our work, and what I previously found in field research over about 20 years or so with insurgents and terrorist groups, mainly in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, is that in conditions of state collapse and fragility and complex emergencies, political authority actually tends to ebb away from the very institutions that the international community is trying to set up. Political power flows from central to regional and then local groups. It flows away from civilian leaders to people with weapons, and it flows away from the institutions, the formal institutions of the state, to informal setups and institutions at the community level. The international community then prefers to work with centralized authority of state institutions led by civilian or at least non-armed actors. And the reality in these environments tends to be that political power has diffused to the local level to community-based armed groups. And so that creates a conundrum. We come in with an approach that's very well suited to stable environments, and it very well reflects international norms, but it's badly suited to the actual power realities of the environments where we intervene, where the real power and the ability to resolve conflict or the ability to perpetuate violence seemingly endlessly doesn't actually lie with the people that we're engaging with, but rather with non-state, local community groups rather than the institutions of a central state. The result is often more chaos and even more violence over time. Let me give you three examples. The first is Iraq. Ambassador Rees just spoke very accurately about what happened in Anbar during the awakening, but if you go back in the period of our intervention in Iraq to 2003, there was an extremely awkward period where military commanders, civilian officials, and a variety of other people wanted to engage with the very same tribes that put the awakening together several years later, wanted to engage with the same community groups that even then were already turning against Al-Qaeda and some of the radical groups, but were specifically banned from doing that by the Coalition Provisional Authority under Ambassador Bremer. CPA policy was not to engage with non-state actors, not to engage with community leaders, and not to work with the tribes. And in fact, the awakening in Anbar was the fifth awakening, the fifth attempt by the tribes to turn against Al-Qaeda. On the previous four attempts, we let them hang and they were slaughtered because our policy was not to work with non-state groups. In Afghanistan, since 2001, we've seen a very similar situation. The international community, through the Bonn process, centralized political authority in the hands of somebody, President Hamid Karzai, who was too weak to exercise that authority on his own. And so he had to make a series of deals with important players and actors within the Afghan political structure, which led to the fact that, on the one hand, we've got an Afghan government which, on paper, is the most centralised in the world, but on the other hand, doesn't do much actual governing because it can't. And one particularly good illustration of why this is a problem is in the rule of law sector, where we went in, rewrote the Afghans' legal code for them, built a Supreme Court building in Kabul, started training judges and prosecutors, and building from the top down a state institution of courts, prosecutors, and so on. The Taliban came in at the local level with mobile courts several months after we arrived and ate our lunch at the local level, and are now effectively administering rule of law across large parts of the south and east of the country through informal, community-based processes, while the institutions of the central state are yet to catch up. But I think the classic example is actually neither Iraq nor Afghanistan, but actually Somalia. You may remember that in 1992, after the collapse of the Siad Barre regime and the famine, the international community intervened in Somalia with a classic top-down, state-focused, international community-led, you little natives get out of the way while us white guys tell you how this is going to be. We're going to back up the big democracy truck, unpack progress, and everything is going to be fine. The result has been a near total failure. In the north of the country, in the same time frame, the same ethnic groups, following the same state collapse, the same famine, and the same civil war, went ahead and did things their own way with a bottom-up process that wasn't a process of security enforcement, it was a process of peace building, where the clans got together in 1992-93 and made local-level peace deals. In 93-94, those local-level peace deals resulted in regional charters. And by the end of 1994, there was a provisional government in place acting not only without the support of the international community, but in fact against active opposition from the international community, including the United Nations at times. This year, they went through their third peaceful presidential transition of power. They have a functioning court system, police, a functioning economy, trade unions. All the institutions have emerged that one might expect, but they emerged bottom-up from the community rather than being imposed top-down by international actors. That's only one of a number of examples where we've seen a much better outcome result from bottom-up, community-based peace building rather than top-down security operations by the international community. And I think that's led to some new thinking in the way we deal with these groups. The Sons of Iraq, the Sahwa, the awakening during the surge in Iraq was just one example where by creating a partnership with local communities, we could transform a security environment, not by imposing security, but by building peace, which then led to security. In Afghanistan, there's a program called the Village Stability Operation, sometimes known as the Village Security Operation, which has been mischaracterized as a local police program. It's actually a community-based governance program where local community shuras, councils get together and work on issues to do with securing and feeding and sustaining their own local area. It works very closely with the Community Development Council model, which is, again, not a state-based model and not focused on an exclusive security process, but focused on bottom-up peace building. And going back to Africa briefly, the Office of Transitional Initiatives, which is one of USAID's most important innovations over the last 20 years, invented in 1994 to deal with the situation in the Balkans, has been extremely important in what we've done in Afghanistan and Iraq. But I want to just take you to one example of the sorts of interventions that we can do that may be a little more effective than turning up with 20,000 Marines and trying to solve the security problem. In late July of 2005, there was a helicopter crash in southern Sudan. A helicopter belonging to President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda crashed and killed, as part of the crash, the vice president of independent South Sudan, John Garang. That resulted in 3 days of major rioting across Sudan. At least 150 people were killed, more than 2,000 people were arrested. There was a large amount of communal violence across the south and centre of the country, and a peace deal, which had only just been put in place to resolve 21 years of civil war, was very much in jeopardy. It was a situation somewhat analogous to the airline crash in Rwanda that led to major conflict in 1994. How was that major conflict averted in the case of Sudan? It was averted because John Garang's widow got onto a radio and broadcast to the community of Southern Sudan, hey, guys, this was an accident, relax. And the community calmed down, a lot of the violence went away. How did John Garang's widow get onto a radio? Because OTI had put in an extremely limited, small footprint, carefully targeted intervention of creating local level radio stations so that people could communicate with each other across Southern Sudan. No big institutions, no troops, no large aid programs, just a mechanism which allowed people who were already making peace among themselves to communicate that peace process to each other. And that very small scale, largely unknown aid intervention in Southern Sudan averted in July, August 2005, a similar situation to what may have happened in Rwanda. So limited targeted intervention that focuses on enabling civil society to solve its own problems seems to be something that works better than your traditional international community intervention. That's just what we're seeing in the field right now. And it is changing some of the way that we do business. I think what we're starting to see is new thinking about posture, about how to create the right posture to allow local civil society to fulfill that function of local level peace building. What's the right military posture, the right governance posture, the right trade posture, the right foreign assistance posture, and so on, to enable civil society to engage in bottom-up, community-led peace building that's inclusive rather than exclusive. There is a military role in that. Some of the people in these environments will not negotiate and just need to be taken out of the picture. And that's okay, but it's a very, very limited, carefully targeted role, just like all the other aspects of international community intervention. And so on the whole, I think we're coming to the view that, which may perhaps be entirely obvious to people in this room, but hasn't always been policy in places like the World Bank or NATO or the US government, that we need to be adopting the least intrusive, least expensive approach, focusing on processes rather than structures, focusing on communities, not just on governments, and trying to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Obviously, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions which we can talk about when we have time about how to do that in specific environments. But I just wanted to highlight to you some of the new thoughts that are coming to those of us that work in the field on these issues. Thanks, Roger.